Brought to you with the compliments of Carter's General Store and Crumb's Bakery.
Welcome to our National Botanical Gardens. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time. Now, as you are aware, the site chosen for the National Botanical Gardens is what we know as Codrington Estate, next to Waterford. Now, if you are laying down a foundation or setting down a cornerstone, it is important to understand on that which you now build, the history of the place. Historian Trevor Marshall places this area in historical perspective.
Now, this is Codrington Estate. For those of you who are old enough, older than myself, anybody, to my mind, over 75 now is old. Anybody older than that would remember this as Codrington Estate. For those of you who, let's say from the extremes of Barbados, it is to the west of Lower Estate and Friendship Plantations. It is to the north of Waterford. Waterford was an estate, north of Combermere School. It is to the east of Whitehall, northeast of the National Stadium. In fact, when you stay in the grandstand of the National Stadium and you look across, you can see the expansive manicured lawns. And it is south of Green Hill. Now, all of these spaces are storied in Barbadian history. There's also Story Gap to the west, but Green Hill was established by the Green family, and Codrington is one of your earliest plantations. It is established in the 1640s, according to Peter Campbell and most of the other renowned historians, and it is well positioned. You can, as I said, as we speak, you can hear the wind whistling through our trees here. And most of these plantations were sited on a point where the mill caught that northeast trade wind. Now behind us is the headquarters of the NCC and the old Codrington plantation great house and factory space. Now occupied by the offices of the NCC and also by the headquarters of the Botanical Gardens, and also ancillary and auxiliary entities such as toxicology department, and all of those entities which go together to make us happy in our horticultural experience.
Let us now focus on a brief history of the Codrington Estate.
It is part of the earliest group of plantations established in the 1630s and 40s. Remember, about 1637, sugarcane was established, and experimentation went on until 1640. And from 1640 until today, Barbados has been producing and exporting sugarcane. So Codrington Plantation is there from the beginning. First established by Owen Williams, and he did not give it a particular name. And then he sold it to the Codrington brothers. Now these are two very, very important men in the history of Barbados, John and Christopher.
Christopher Codrington II owned the plantation that is Codrington and St. Michael, and the plantation we now call Society was called Didmartin, and Consett was below. When I was a boy, the two plantations were known as Society and College. Christopher Codrington II was an aggressive, avaricious man.
Now, according to our records, Christopher took this large plantation, 360 acres, while John occupied the one nearer to Consett Bay, which at that time enabled him to export his sugar from that particular bay. And this is 1671. John and Christopher as brothers do, made a decision about these plantations. For John, Concept Bay experiment was not as satisfactory as he wanted. He wanted to be nearer the Bridgetown port. So he and Christopher effective a fraternal transfer.
And that swap happened in 1761. And it is on that location now that the Codrington College is actually constructed in memory of him.
He had become aware of the work being done by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, particularly in Africa. And he decided that he would leave his plantations to the society so that they could create a college. And the words of his will were so that he would create a college with tutors and scholars under vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, he died in 1710 on Good Friday, which I think is a lovely symbolism.
Because that college was constructed exactly 33 years after Christopher's death.
He was a good man, but he had no progeny, and therefore he was free to leave his property to whom he wanted. And so he left a lot of money and his library in Britain, the money to his brother, the library to All Souls College in Oxford, along with a large sum of money to build a library there, and his estates in Barbados to the society, to train doctors and priests. And his theory was that they would be trained in both theology and physic and chirurgery, on the basis that if they were trained in physic and chirurgery, which means medicine and surgery, they would be better able, through being able to cure men's bodies, to minister to their souls. So he had this very modern concept of a doctor priest. It was like Schweitzer in Africa, a very modern idea of a Christian doctor who would minister to both the body and soul and provide what today is called holistic medicine. He would look after the whole person and their spiritual well-being. This was his idea. And when he died, after he died, the Society for Propagation of the Gospel was not very efficient in managing the place. But what they did eventually do was to introduce the first school for the children of slaves in the entire English-speaking Caribbean. And the Society School, established by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, was established more than 200 years ago for the children of the slaves. Nothing else like that happened in Barbados.
Interestingly enough, when you consider what is now occurring here on this site that was once owned by the Codrington brothers, you will see some symbolism, healing, teaching, rejuvenation, relaxation, reading and learning. And that is what this garden will be all about. So it is important that we connect those many dots and understand the history of this location.
So Christopher occupied Codrington Plantation in St. John, and John occupied this one. They held this plantation through the 1600s, and by 1710, Thomas Green established his own estate to the west, the northwest of Codrington. And this brought in an element of competition, and that part of the history is yet to be established by our historians. Perhaps somebody will delve into it. But it was not a cutthroat system then, but people were distinctly competitive. So the Codringtons found themselves having to dispose of the plantation, and this they did in 1780. It was then, by 1796, this plantation is broken up. Originally it was 360 acres, now it came down to about 320. And pieces of this plantation were taken over by Waterford Plantation, and to the northeast of it there was a plantation called Commery, C-O-M-M-E-R-Y. As a matter of fact, my good friend and taxi man, Mr. Richards, tells me, he's from St. Vincent, that up to about 25 years ago, he cut canes at Comery Plantation, which was to the east of Codrington Estate. Other pieces of the estate went to Green Hill Plantation, and it seems as though the Grisettes also took part of it. In any case, the plantation was not substantially reduced. It came down to the 20th century as 320 acres. Now, we have evidence from Woodville Marshall's research, Professor Sir Woodville Marshall's research, that the move towards free villages and empeasantization of Barbadian spaces, that went on after 1838, which, as you know, is the end of slavery in Barbados. And by 1852, we see evidence that there is a free village on the outskirts of the Codrington plantation, and that's to the northeast. Since then, that has gone to Story Gap and to Whitehall and Green Hill. So all of that were parts of the environs of Codrington. And by 1885, it is established as a principal village, Codrington. So there's Codrington Estate, Codrington Tenantry, and the Free Village. And so Woodville has done a fantastic job working on and reporting on the history of these free villages, as you've probably seen in many of his works, and also in his magnum opus of Halls, Hills, and Holes. All right? And there it is mentioned from 1885 as a major, a principal village, which means it is a large urban village, and going into Greater Bridgetown, because what we now know as Bridgetown goes up to Warrens, it goes up to the Bell, even encroaching on St. George, goes up to the Pine, etc. So by 1885, Codrington is a principal village, an urban village, right, along with Bank Hall, Bush Hall, Rebbets, and others like that. And then it is also at that time the home of a very famous Barbadian, John Redmond Bovell. Now Bovell is known as the man who initiated research into seedlings and growing new varieties of cane, bourbon, and others like that. And working with Irenaeus Harper, they discovered that you could reproduce sugar cane. So John Redmond Bovell, who's on our $2 note, the blue $2 note, he occupied Codrington House as his residence.
You may remember that John R. Bovell was the man who took the information that came out at Highland Plantation, found by a worker there, showing seedlings. He said, "These are sugarcane seedlings." And John R. Bovell was the man who developed the breeding, and Grove was established in the same year that they established a cane breeding station in Malaysia.
And then Codrington Plantation and Redmond Bovell's house and a residence, they are elevated to being the most important plantation in Barbados in terms of development of the sugar industry. Not Groves, not Draxhall, not Buckley, but Codrington is the place where in 1898 became the headquarters of your Imperial Department of Agriculture is established. And so it remained into this 20th century.
Folk sounds are a part of our musical traditions, and many of those sounds have been inspired by our lived experiences. Have you ever heard the folk song March Monkey? Well, there is a connection with March Monkey and this location.
Now, we have done research on folk music, and we know that from the 1860s, Glenderry Prison was established. Glenderry, just half a mile down from Codrington, was established as the country's lone penitentiary. But prior to that, Codrington was a penal outpost. When you look around at the old houses, the old mansions in Barbados, you see there are of cut coral stone. Each of those blocks, let's say 36 inches by 20, weighs about 50 pounds. And inmates of Glenderry prison, they were sent to Glenderry to do hard labor. And hard labor in those days was really hard labor. Weeding, forking, and cutting coral stone blocks to make up many of the buildings you see around us. For example, Norham down in Tweedside Road, etc., and Great Pilgrim, Government House, all of these were built of cut coral stone, cut by the prisoners at Glenderry Prison. And this is where the folk heritage of Barbados comes alive. There was a policeman whose beat included this area, District A. This District A station at what has been called Station Hill, just north of Hinesbury Road. Now, policemen were stationed there, and they were vigilant, much as they are today. And this just shows you how the past always repeats itself. There was a curfew at the time, and shopkeepers had to shut their shops at 8 o'clock. Shopkeepers in urban and suburban Bridgetown. And there was a particular policeman who was extremely vigilant and extremely severe on the poor people at that time. And Shillingford Airguard, Shilling, known to us as a balladeer, my doggy loves your doggy, if our doggies love us, why can't we? And that is one of Shilling's songs. But Shilling was known for March Monkey. This particular policeman, perhaps the people who he terrorized called him March Monkey, and he would run at them, and I'm going to lock you up and send you up to Codrington to cut stones. And so Shilling composed this song on March Monkey. This is found in our book, Folk Songs of Barbados. March Monkey was sharp, you know. He used to run the hawkers to and fro. The shops he report for 5 minutes late, and the butchers couldn't get rest at the market gate. March Monkey, it serves you quite right for telling a lie for stripe. And up to now, we ain't getting 5 months you deserve in Glenderry prison cell, and up to Codrington Hill you must go and break stones. But March Monkey was sharp, you know. He used to run the hawkers to and fro. The shops he report for 5 minutes late, and the butchers couldn't get rest at the market gate. And then he tells you, March Monkey, it serves you quite right for telling a lie for a stripe, for a promotion. And then he puts in this little one, and up to now he didn't get it. Because March Monkey was caught telling a lie in a trial, and that is perjury. So he found himself on the opposite side of the law, and he was sentenced to 5 months hard labor at Glenderry. And his service was that he had to come up to Codrington and break stones like all the other inmates. And it is immortalized in song. But what it does tell you is that Codrington was a penal outpost. Right? It was the place where prisoners or inmates of Glenderry would come out here on mornings. In the detail, you saw them in their prison dungarees, walking in a line past Waterford Estate, which is now Combermere School, and coming over here to Codrington. So this is about 3/4 of a mile from Glenderry, and this is part of their sentence. They would come here to Codrington and cut coral stone, and they would get a penny a day for cutting one of those 50-pound blocks of coral stone. And that penny a day was put for them until they had served out their term, and it was given to them as a lump sum so they could start life afresh. Codrington enters the folk history of Barbados. It's not just a plantation on which you cut sugarcane till it burn your hand, but it is a place where people like March Monkey and other persons who were wretched, the wretched of the Barbadian earth, that is, they were incarcerated, imprisoned for transgressing the law, they had to come here and cut coral stone blocks. When you pass Codrington on your way to or from Green Hill, you notice that the wall is composed of cut coral stone. And inside, most of the buildings are also of cut coral stone and not your lath and plaster, which was the type of building constructed before the 20th century. So all your buildings here are of cut coral stone, and they're quite solid, and they're testimony to the hard work of those prison laborers from this area. And before we leave that period, before we leave the 1800s, it's from the 1850s, Barbadians, the authorities in Barbados began to look out for permanent resting places for the unfortunates. The almshouses were established, right, for more of the wretched of the earth, those persons who had nowhere to lay their head. They were the precursors of your geriatric hospitals, St. Philip and St. Michael. And then mental health, mental degeneracy was an issue even then after the 1850s. And the authorities here looked swiftly to establish what was called a lunatic asylum. Now, before that, they established a board of education. So you looked after, the board of education looked after the very young, those of school age. The almshouses looked after those who had nowhere to rest their head. Today we have places for the homeless and those who are sufferers of extreme diseases, cancer, etc. And you have Glenderry. Glenderry is 1865, and your lunatic asylum, which has gone through a number of iterations, lunatic asylum, then the mental hospital, and now a much more politically correct psychiatric hospital. Codrington was initially thought of as 1873. 1873, Codrington was thought of as a place for your lunatic asylum.
It was the first location or locale for a lunatic asylum. And that asylum stayed here for 20 years before the Ministry of Health actually purchased the plantation house in Black Rock called Jenkinsville. And that today is now the psychiatric hospital.
And Codrington in 1898 became the headquarters of your Imperial Department of Agriculture.
Even after slavery, this area remained a very, very, very potent agriculture society, because the Ministry of Agriculture headquarters was located here in the late 60s and early 70s.
And we can see why. When you look around this botanical garden, this is a most salubrious spot. The northeast trade wind blows constantly, sometimes ferociously. You see all around there is greenery. So even during the dry months of the year, that is January to May, this is really a refreshing place to be. It has a consistent atmosphere of peace and serenity. There are numerous trees. It is a horticulturalist delight. We can see why the late Iris Bannocky, the grand dame of environmental appreciation in Barbados, as we said, she and her husband, Harry Bailey, established Andromeda Gardens. And when they were looking around for a place for what was called the Parks and Beaches Commission of Barbados, for someone or a group of people to look after the environment of Barbados. Right? Remember, the parks and beaches. And that includes looking after the seaweed, which more or less desecrates our beaches.
And subsequently, the house itself then was the headquarters of the Park and Beaches Commission.
The Parks and Beaches Commission was established in 1970. Its role to maintain, control and develop parks and beaches throughout the island. First there was Queen's Park, then King George V. Now, due to the generosity and social awakening of private citizens and organizations, coupled with the government's help, more parks have been opened.
Could no longer depend on voluntary activity from plantation owners who kept the area around the train, the railway clean. So we had your Parks and Beaches Commission,
which then became the National Conservation Commission in 1982. And I could go on to say, and the Office of the National Botanical Gardens in 2002. So you have a sequence of historical events bringing us to this point and the historic role of this property over the centuries.
Something absolutely rewarding about connecting those many dots and understanding the historical significance of this space to a people and recognizing all that has gone before and is now making it what it is today. Fatalism or determinism perhaps, but this is our National Botanical Gardens. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. We'll see you next time.
Brought to you with the compliments of Carter's General Store and Crumbs Bakery.